girls. In the Sadie Hawkins day, total abandon, rejecting everything and looking for something positive and new. A total sexual abandon, drug abandon, dancing abandon.
We had an opportunity to visit highly experimental places under the influence of highly experimental chemicals before a highly experimental audience. It was ideal, you know.
It's an interactive event, the Grateful Dead. We've become one big entity tied at the heart. That's what it's all about. We're not the whole event, but we're an important part. We're what the event sounds like, and we offer a space to ritualize.
So these were like mass excuses for letting yourself go without being the spotlight of anything. Even the bands, Grace used to say the only reason that she enjoyed being on stage at these things is because the stage was the least crowded place at the party. And you could see up over everybody and see what was going on everywhere.
One time I hitchhiked from Austin to San Francisco with this guy, and then later, his name is Chet Helms. Later, he got involved in promoting the dances in San Francisco.
I love the acoustic draping in the Avalon, which gave it a wonderful, warm, interior, womb-like sound. I love the sprung dance floor, which if you got 300 or 400 people dancing on the floor at one time, the floor would rise to meet you and lift you even higher, you know.
The Avalon and such similar institutions are the few socializing institutions which teach people how to live and be with one another.
They were experimenting with being loose at the beginning also. It's like, oh my God, it's safe here. And I can, you know, eat myself with cigarettes without anybody catching me. I can hug a girl, or I can put paint on my face. I can put on Goodwill clothes. I can act that cavalierism. You know, there was a very nice feeling of open airness, even though you were indoors.
Well, Chet was the, he was the mellow guy, and Bill was the bully, you know. So Chet did it in a nice homespun way, and Bill was really aggressive and really wanted to make a home for rock and roll, and he had big plans.
There was a jam session. Michael Bloomfield was playing Hammond organ, Jerry Garcia was playing guitar, Paul Kantner was playing guitar, and I waited for Jerry to finish the solo, and then, you know, they said, go ahead. So I jumped on it, and when I finished, Bill came over and said, hey, yeah, that's pretty good. You got a band? I said, yeah, I got a band. He says, okay. He says, I want you to come on over and open up for the Loading Zone and the Who, you know? At that time, everybody was playing blues. Jimi Hendrix, Cream, John Mayall, just louder and maybe a little more adventuresome chords, but it was still the blues. We came out with some blues, but the foundation was Afro-Cuban music. So all of a sudden, the women could dance.
And there wasn't this, wanna dance, honey? You know, my name is George. What's yours? Charlotte? Out of sight, Charlotte. No, they would walk in, and if 10 people were dancing, they would join a circle. Or they'd see one girl standing there, and they would just move. And they may not say anything to each other all night long. Or they may leave together. But if they didn't leave together, it was a thank you. Okay. That was a fantasy, but it was nice. And it was healthy. And nobody lost. And the key to those years for me was that everybody won and nobody lost. The musicians had a good time, the producer had a good time, the public had a good time.
Taking their social cue from the idea of endless summer and California culture. All of a sudden, almost overnight, people were growing their hair long, taking lots of drugs, and trying their darndest to all screw each other freely.
Sexuality became less important, oddly enough, in the sense that you didn't have to spend this long courting time of the boy always figuring out a way to get inside the girl's pants. There were no pants. It was the 60s.
thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to go to one of those other things, do a thing dedicated to that little girl over there called Hartley. Thing called Foxy Lady. Look out.
Like if I'll get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm not, I'm really sleepy, but then I open the door and see somebody that appeals to me, Or like, first of all, think, what in the world is she doing here? And she says, oh, maybe, can I come in? And I'm standing there and really digging her, she's really nice looking, To tell the honest God truth, like, she's about 19, 20, or, beyond the age of so-and-so. And so I said, oh, well, I'll probably stand there, and then...
Physical desire is very normal, and it happens, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think that sex is just much groovier when there's love, There's a lot more happening, but there's nothing wrong with just sex for sex.
I remember Eric Burdon saying about the difference between the way, say, I smashed up a guitar or played a guitar or beat a guitar or set fire to a guitar and Jimi Hendrix was that with Jimi Hendrix it was erotic and with me it was rape.
If you always go to a movie and it's like a little screen and then all of a sudden they give you CinemaScope, and that was the music of Jimi Hendrix. Even on Blues Changes, his music was very wide.
When I feel like cleaning my teeth, I do it because I feel like it. When I'm on stage, I'm complete natural, more so than, talking to a group of people or something.
And Jimi Hendrix, again, had this kind of role of exorcist. He put Vietnam into that amplifier and just kind of... He's the great instrumental genius of rock and roll.
There wasn't necessarily just one way that the world was going to be, whether it was spiritual power, emotional power, sexual power, physical power. Hendrix, all people who just came in and knocked all those doors down. His guitar playing that spoke of some deep ecstasy that could be had,
Around 66, there was more of the psychedelic. People were getting more experimental, like Hendrix and the Doors.
What the music is your special friend. Dance on fire is intense. Music is your only friend.
I thought it was very dark music when I heard it. I thought it was kind of mysterious and dark. I didn't know what to make of it. But I thought the words were really, really good. You could tell right away that, well, we got a writer here.
Jim Morrison was a post-beat writer. He was absolutely influenced by Kerouac, Ginsberg, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac.
What have they done to the earth? What have they done to our fair sister? Ravaged and plundered, ripped her and bit her. stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn and tied her with fences and dragged her down.
We tried to find that freedom in art, poetry, and music, whereas the Beats were all into literature and poetry and jazz. We tried to combine poetry and music, poetry and rock and roll.
When the music's over,
The creation of the Doors. It happened to be in California, but obviously what was going on was a psychedelic revolution was happening in all of the major cities and then into the minor small town college towns all across America. It was happening in New York and Chicago and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland.
music is your special friend. Dance on fire is...
It was a perfect age to get the full effect of psychedelia. I was like 16 years old, watching Jimi Hendrix play and going to the Hyde Park to see the Rolling Stones and listening to all the American psychedelic bands, the sort of San Franciscan sort of odd bunch, but also the Velvet Underground and the Doors.
Psychedelic craze was in, and we wanted to go against the grain as far as the flavor of music at that time. We turned it back and went more blues, more roots music oriented. So when we played for Bill Graham at Fillmore East, that was one of our requests, was to turn the light show way down, if not completely off.
When I get off of this mountain, you know where I wanna go. Straight down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. Big Charles, Louisiana, little Mexico, I want to. She told me just to come on by if there's anything she could do.
Bob Dylan got us to Woodstock. We played with Bob for some shows through the United States and Canada. We followed Bob up to the country and started getting together in the afternoons and trying to come up with tunes. Bob and Richard used to have a typewriter that sat on the coffee table there in the living room, and the two of them would go by and type little notes to each other, and one would read what the other one wrote, put a couple of lines in under that. A lot of times by the end of the day, we'd have a couple of 3 pages out of there. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, those are the things that they're using to sell rock and roll, which seems a damn shame when you get down to it. The music is certainly capable of doing that on its own.
The Stones eroticized it, made it wild, made it dangerous, made it revolutionary, made it druggy. You know, the Beatles were taking drugs, but nobody knew. You know, you only knew if you hung out with them. But the Stones took drugs in public, on stage, you know.
Oh, yeah, my buddy, old Lucifer, you know. Hey, we're like this, you know. Maybe we are, I don't know. I mean, we always thought it was a laugh, you know, the 5 guitar players, you know, we're gonna overthrow the country. I mean, they're starting to treat us like revolutionaries. Geez, great, just like a little dope, you know what I mean? You know, and then you got half of Scotland Yard working full time on you. You know, surely you got better things to do, boys.
Keith did his homework very carefully. Jagger did his homework carefully. You know, he had seen Tina Turner, he'd seen Little Richard, he'd seen, he learned from the best. Most great artists watch the best person out there, and they emulate that person, and then after a while it grows into their own particular style.
The
it's all very kind of sexually charged, the whole thing, really. I'm just the same as Ripper. I go out there and do the same thing, bumps and grinds to music, and take off lots of my clothes. I mean, so there's not really a lot of difference between stripping and being a rock singer.
America was like fairyland, and all the best music came from there, and they had the best cars, and the chicks looked better. So it was like throwing a load of demons into heaven, you know, and they letting them loose.
Television's boring anymore. Let's make sure there ain't nobody there. Can you come a little bit? Okay, tell us when. Okay. Now.
Legendary. I've known worse, I've known far more.
The Beatles and the Stones, obviously. Cream came over with real challenging musical landscapes and pushing what the Beatles opened up, you know, beyond the 3-chord, 4-chord kind of songs, making anything possible.
Cream, Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce, Eric Clapton. Great group. One night, Terry and I went into Winterland, and I thought this is the best band in the world. I said to him, yeah, is this the best band in the world? He said, tonight, they're the best band in the world.
I can walk down the street, there's no one there.
Cream, The Who, Jimi Hendrix. Today, you don't have a handful of bands that are so unique in their own right.
Jamming was very important. This was a residue of Jimi Hendrix. That approach involved much more virtuosity as an instrumentalist, less emphasis on song structures and simple pop structures and things like that, and much more emphasis on prowess as a musician.
Time when Cream came out, and we were in school and we heard the song Spoonful. So, okay, we could figure that 2-note riff. Dum, 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 dum. So we could figure that far. And then Clapton just goes, and like, for me, I went like, oh, we'll never get that.
At the time that I started playing, most guitar players were trying to be follow the other white players, you know, and I was much more, you know, very racial about it. I wanted to be like a black guitar player.
Ginger Baker was scary back then. He was so good. For 3 pieces, I'd never heard 3 pieces that were better.
Ginger Baker, Keith Moon. Keith Moon was another drummer that everybody overlooks. I mean, he was an incredible drummer.
Keith, what's your opinion of your public image?
I think it sort of varies with every record I put out. I think sometimes could you get on with it? Will you keep it together? No, I think I'm very reliant on my management and my public relations people.
Every
everybody's trying to be unique and innovative, but few really achieve that. You know, they're like the Beatles had a distinct sound, the Stones had a distinct sound. Like when you hear them, you know it's them. The Grateful Dead, The Who.
When you start smashing a guitar on a stage in Germany, it happened in parts of the States, a policeman would walk on the stage and put a gun to my head and say, "Stop, or I'll shoot you." And I would kind of look at him and go, "Hold on a minute, this is a guitar, not a human being, remember?" You know. It became hugely important because it was actually perceived to be a social statement. You know, attack the country in which we've grown up and say, listen, we love our country, but it's decaying, it's going, there's a new world ahead of us.
It was like rock and roll was the beginning of the brand new world in terms of a generation bringing on its own consciousness through music to other generation.
Look yonder, tell me what's that you see? Marching to the fields of Dunkirk. Looks like hands and...
Looking out over Woodstock, something I expected should and did happen. That was our national celebration of multicultural community. That's what Woodstock was, the top of the mountain, the plateau. We got up there. We were now able to walk across. We had actually reached a point in time and place which could never be erased from the history of the world.
Hey, look yonder, tell me what's that you see? Marching to the fields of Korea. Looks like Hans and Johnny.
It's really amazing. You know, it looks like some kind of biblical, epical, unbelievable scene.
Feel back now, let's go through. Everything's got room to flow here.
Suddenly, the whole world was indeed watching us, and we had a chance to show the world what it would be like to pull ourselves up by our collective bootstraps and let them see how it would be if we ran the show.
We'll be free, baby boy, we'll be free, yeah, free, yeah, 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 yeah.
I remember being up in that helicopter with the state cops, you know, and one cop said to the other one, "You know there's hippies smoking dope down there." And the other one said, "Yeah, well, I ain't gonna do anything about it, are you?" And the other one said, "Uh-uh." And we were just flying, and I suddenly realized we could do anything we want, because there's just more of us than them.
Hey, look yonder, tell me what's that you see? Marching to the field of Birmingham. Looks like Handsome Johnny with his hand rolling a fist.
There were many messages that we wanted to convey to people about civil rights, about pacifism, but there seemed to be no entry to mass media at all. And along came the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and suddenly we all snapped. These messages can be put in the form of rock and roll.
Some of you are not even listening. Tell me what it is we've got to do. Wait for our fields to start listening. Hey, wait for us to start whistling.
We were the rock and rollers who became those radical, you know, or radicalized kids of the 60s. But Woodstock was not sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was civil rights. It was Vietnam War. It was youth power. It was the nation coming together.
Well, come on, all of you big, strong men. Uncle Sam needs your help again. Got himself in a terrible jam way down yonder in Vietnam. Put down your books and pick up a gun. We're gonna have a whole lot of fun. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. We're all gonna die.
It started in the 50s as part of the civil rights movement. In other words, the gains that were made for most Americans were not made for all Americans. How are we going to tell those people in Vietnam how to live if we can't treat our own people right over here? And what about sending people over there who's too young to vote on it? And why is it somebody can go over and get shot for their country and can't go down to the bar and have a beer for their country?
You want a 15-year-old girl sleeping in the field in tent? Are they out of your mind? Never should have happened.
Does you feel bad about the kids who were killed in Vietnam?
This has nothing to do with
it has the same thing.
Nothing at all to do with it. There's no comparison.
People got more excited about the kids in Monticello than they do about the young kids.
It never should have happened.
Unlike a lot of protest anti-war songs of that whole entire decade, Fixing Direct was embraced by military personnel in Vietnam, much to my surprise.
Now come on, mothers throughout the land, pack your boys off to Vietnam. Come on, fathers, don't hesitate. Send your sons off before it's too late. Be the first one on your block, have your boy come home in a box.
You know, and you see how they function on their own. Without cops, without guns, without clubs, without hassles. Everybody pulls together and everybody helps each other. And it works. It's been working since we got here. And it's going to continue working. And no matter what happens when they go back to the cities, this thing has happened. And it proves that it can happen.
I think Janis Joplin said it best when she was on stage. She said, if you have any food left, share it with your brother and your sister. And that's the person on your right and the person on your left.
One of the things that began to happen with the BN, with Woodstock, was a kind of verification that there were substantial numbers of people interested in new ways of living and a new culture. And sometimes getting them all together in a big group where you can see each other is the best way to support them.
Jamming is playing hooky. It's really that simple. And when I was in Mission High School, I played a lot of hooky. We didn't know what the hell a bridge was, or a chorus was, or a verse was, and we couldn't care less. We just wanted to play what we heard. If you stay in your heart, you will always be inspired. If you're inspired, you will always be enthusiastic. There is nothing more contagious on this planet than enthusiasm. The songs become incidental. What people receive is your joy. If you want to grab somebody from the lapels, you know, and you want to make it like, listen to me, you go. So you're hitting two notes at the same time instead of. It sounds, you know, tame, but if you go... To have a real deep convictions before you hit that note. And most of the time people go, damn, you know, because, you know, whether it's Ry Cooder or whoever, they hit one note, every hair in your body is going to stand up. And you feel like you just made love, or you just touched God's feet, or both at the same time. You know, that's when music is really, really good. You know, that's what I learned from Coltrane and Bob Marley and Jimi Hendrix, is that music is a complete ocean.
Music is the whole thing, man.
It's an expression of the younger generation. Now, we have the power, we have the tolerance. We can go in front of a television camera, we can go on the air, and we can say, with definition, that Hitler was wrong, that people who hate Negroes are wrong, right? And we can get up there and shout it to the world.
When rock and roll came along, it gave power to the kids on the street. It gave them something to do. It gave them a feeling that there was something that was theirs, that was not a part of their parents' world, and was beloved because of that.
You are what you are. You make it hard. Something inside is telling me that I've got your secret.
I was hanging out with Stephen. They had thrown me out of the Byrds. And I was singing harmony with him because he had great songs. We dragged Nash off someplace and, sang with him. And it was an astounding thing what he did. How do he do that? And we knew what we wanted to do there.
You are mine. You are what you are. You make it hard. Hard. And you make it hard.
Now, you got to understand, here's three guys that had been and had bad relationships in bands. David had been thrown out the Byrds. The Buffalo Springfield had broken up. The Hollies were less than desired by me. We didn't want to be in a band again, ever. And we realized that we would have to be in a band because we wanted this sound. We wanted to do, that's all we wanted to do.
What have you got to lose?
How was the festival in general? Would you consider it a success?
It was incredible.
Yeah.
It was probably the strangest thing that's ever happened in the world.
I still have my mud.
About 2 nights ago, that place up there was the second biggest city in New York.
People would begin to follow the festivals, not so much for the tunes, but to get together and create these instant cities, to do this life support, to figure out the food, the garbage, the whole deal, and to live this positive, creative anarchy that I think eventually began to terrify the powers that be.
What did I think of Goose Lake? I dug it. It was a good festival.
I've been to 4 festivals now, and it's about the second best one I've been to. My favorite was Kickapoo.
It was the worst drug orgy that was ever held in the United States.
This wasn't just camping out, like sportsmen do, or even outdoors enthusiasts. This was wallowing.
Do you bathe like this often?
No, this is the first time since I've been here.
Do you feel the festival had some motivation with the fact that you're bathing nude?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't be bathing nude if other people were bathing nude too.
Be on my side or be on your side, baby. There is no reason for you to hide.
It's like in the spirit of the whole festival. People sharing the water.
When you could be taking me for a ride. Ooh, yeah. She could drag me over the rainbow. Send me away.
We had this incredibly tight harmony sound, and where was room for somebody else here?
He was just so musical and so good that we thought, well, maybe cramming 4 into a space that's only big enough for 3 will be explosive.
Neil was something else. What a piece of work he was.
Neil was sharing a room with the gerbil.
Actually, 2 Bush babies, but he was, Harriet and Speedy, in the Caravan Lodge Motel in San Francisco.
You'd walk in the door and these things would ricochet past your face.
They go, toing!
Don't let him out! Don't let him out!
I'm not kidding. Not kidding.
Insane.
Harriet and Speedy, the Bush babies. Of course, Neil is the guy that ended up with 300 chickens in his basement because he'd been given a present of 2 chickens and couldn't kill them.
Neil has had an incredible career, you know, the godfather of grunge, you know, and all that, whatever they're calling him now.
I was into the rock and roll and the whole hippie concept. To me, it ended with Woodstock. And a lot of people thought it was just beginning. But my interpretation was, you're going to have some jive in it. So it used to be share this, share that. That had its own kind of protection, you know, because it was all done weird as it sounds, out of love, whatever they was doing.
There was a moment there where there was a vision. There was a very clear, wonderful vision but it had to do with everybody acting in good faith. It had to do with everybody behaving right.
Okay, everybody knows there's something funny going on.
Yeah, your money in your pocket.
Tell them, want to make more money, you prick. Turn it up.
Man, you got your money? Come on, let them in. You're in a revolution, man, let them in.
The question of kids now wanting everything to be free is very hard to handle because it's hard to talk to those kids.
Even you?
What?
Even you?
Even me, hard to talk to them, of course. Because to them, I represent, among other things, somebody who has money, and that makes them angry.
The Isle of Wight Festival was the Hate the Performer Festival. It was bigger than Woodstock, and it was international. It was surrounded by a galvanized fence, which went all the way around. The audience was rough and unruly, and they booed and hissed and yelled, "You sold out. The music belongs to the people. Let's bring the walls down." We're sitting here in our own shit, and you're back there in your Rolls Royce.
None of this capitalist shit. Open this up. The music isn't revolutionary at all. You know, it's called big establishment. It's a big business trip, that's all.
And if you come to this country at our invitation, and we have to charge you through no choice of our own, £3, right? If you don't want to pay it, don't fucking well come.
Listen a minute, will you? Will you listen a minute? Now listen. A lot of people who get up here and sing, I know it's fun, you know, it's a lot of fun. It's fun for me. I get my feelings off through my music. But listen, you got your life wrapped up in it, and it's very difficult to come out here and lay something down when people... I think that you're acting like tourists, man. Give us some respect.
Paradise, put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. The paradise, put up a parking.
I believe this is my festival. If I'd been allowed to go on stage, we might have discovered that I was one of the most coherent people around here. Coming to talk to an old friend of mine, Joni Mitchell.
Wait a second, please.
We are stardust.
Not with the festival.
We are
I'm only taking pictures.
We got to get ourselves back into the garden.
You don't know what you've got till it's gone. The paradise, put up a parking lot.
It was really a moment. There was like a breath there for a moment. There was like an open door. You know, it's like, ooh, look. You know, then bam, it slammed shut again immediately.
With a DDT now. And these spots on my elbows, leaving the birds at the beat. Please don't it always seem to...
Whereas I was a ham on a small scale, and I liked the small clubs. The bigger the stage got, the more isolated you were. I'd been in the street too long, going anywhere I wanted to by myself too long to give it up, you know. So the idea of being protected and sheltered, and it was excruciatingly depressing to me, the change. I had no designs to be a star.
Well, nobody wants to be in the center of the spotlight, you know, not in your life. Maybe in your work, but not in your life.
You read about yourself in the papers and people that you're supposed to have slept with, hotels that you're supposed to have burned to the ground, and at first you feel kind of violated. And then you realize, hell, this character is much more interesting than I am. I should run with it.
This whole success thing,
It hasn't yet really compromised the position that I took a long time ago in Texas. That was to be true to myself, to be the person that was on the inside of me, and not play games. I said that's what I'm trying to do mostly, in the whole world, is to not bullshit myself.
Oh, honey, like you, the only man I ever wanted and I ever needed. Oh, honey, didn't I give you nearly everything I ever had to give? I tried to do it. Each time I tell myself that I think I've had enough work. I'm gonna show you, baby, that a woman can be tough. Won't you take
Janis was a money magnet. And I know, because I spoke to her, I knew the pressures that she was under to be a saleable commodity. And part of that commodity was what killed her, because it had to be this tougher, boozy, two-fisted broad who always went home alone. And she was a lonely girl.
She had a problem of getting off stage and unplugging from the business. So she began using downers and alcohol to deal with her loneliness, and that she was without the community and without her friends and with strangers, essentially.
Every time deep, deep inside. And each time I tell myself that I think I've had enough, babe. But I'm gonna show you, darling.
And passing around this Dutch counterpart to Southern Comfort, everybody held the last swallow and simultaneously spat into the fire. And there was this blast of light, and I heard this cackle coming through the smoke flaps, and I think that was Janis saying goodbye.
You know you got it. If it makes you feel good right now.
It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. He was a brilliant poet, and John and Robbie and I loved him like he was our brother. All four of us were brothers. We were conquering the universe together. You know, we were bringing a message of love and strangeness to the universe, and he's gone, and it's a real tragedy for me and real sadness.
You know, when people talk to me about Keith Moon, you know, that are fans, they have no conception of how much I hate him for killing himself. I love him, but I'm so angry with him for wasting his life.
That's why a lot of people died, because a whole lot of us, having been so disappointed in what life turned out supposedly to be, just turned our backs on it and went looking at the other agenda, the ones that we weren't, the unapproved agendas. Some killed people, as in any explorations, or we had nothing to explore but ourselves.
You know you got it.
With the mass acceptance comes tremendous fear of subversion, from the outside or from the inside. And virtually all rock musicians came from the outside of society in some fashion. All of a sudden, you're the big insider.
Everybody can protest, you know, and anybody can write beautiful songs and all that. But sometimes if you have a talent, or if people are noticing you enough, then you should really try to do as much as you possibly can with it, you know. Like what we're going to do now is chop down the words now and try to make it really tight. And what we're saying is not protesting, but giving the answers or some kind of solution, you know, instead of going towards a negative scene.
Jimmy was quite an interesting man, completely different than his public image. He was supposed to be this wild man, and when in fact he was very gentle, very introspective, very bright man. One of the greatest musicians I'll ever have the pleasure of knowing.
Gig together was the Isle of Wight, right before he died, which I had a big conversation with him there too about the problems he was having in business then. And I was saying, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. We'll get together, we'll talk about it, I'll be in London. and he never showed up.
Well, Jimmy was a great guitar player, and I thought he was the best, the most original. I thought he had a really original act, you know, and that's all, man. I don't know nothing about his business, whether he was a casualty, and I wish he was still here.
I want to say thank you very much for tonight. I want to say peace, yeah, and happiness.
How well would Hendrix be playing by now? What would Janis be singing like by now? We're talking major stuff here. Genius that got dropped on the floor and ground into the dirt.
Look at my life. Look at my generation. How did that work? Jimi Hendrix, Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, Keith Moon. The list is fucking endless. They're dead people. My life is full of dead people. My friends are dead. My friends. They might be your fucking icons. They're my fucking friends. They're dead.
Janis and Jimmy didn't have a family. They didn't have nothing to go home to. A family, a group that could really tell them what, you know, what's really going on. Here's what you really look like, man. Not what you think you look like.
If you look at the Dead and the band as two examples, they're still together and we're not, because they ended up keeping their own council and ended up keeping their family together.
For the last 3 years, I think, the Grateful Dead have been the largest grossing live act in the world. Amazing.
It's more fulfilling to be a person than a personality. Most personalities that I've seen, limousines and suites, you know, that stuff cannot hug you.
We were right about civil rights. We were right in that love is better than hate. We were right in that peace is better than war. It turns out, weren't right about drugs.
The free sexuality was an interesting experiment. It failed.
But when I think about the 60s, I think of the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement.
Well, I call it the under-the-counter culture, and the thing is that we're coming out from under the counter. And there's a buzz going on these days called new volunteerism, where people are feeling they get to the bottom of their second BMW and they find it wanting.
That was the point of rock and roll at the time, to become a new tribe, to bring America into a cleaner, purer realm of existence.
You were raising your flag and you were screaming aloud and together. We thought there were millions. There were only hundreds or maybe thousands of us. But you can't stop a good idea or a feeling, and that's what we had.
For like 2 weeks in the middle of 1967 summer, it was perfect.
Let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. I have no kick against modern jazz. Unless they try to play it too darn fast. And change the beauty of the melody. Until it sounds just like a symphony. That's why I go for that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. Don't care to hear them play a tango. I'm in the mood to dig a mambo. It's too early for the Congo. So keep a rocking that piano.